Welcome to part 1 of the history of Liseberg Amusement Park. In part 1, we will cover the history of the park from its opening in 1923 right up to 1960. Liseberg can be found in the city of Gothenburg in Sweden. Originally, the park was opened as the Jubilee Exhibition Amusement Park and was created to celebrate Gothenburg's 300th anniversary. The Jubilee Exhibition Amusement Park opened on May the 8th, but many of the attractions and buildings were not ready for the opening. These including the Bergbanan, which didn't open till May the 19th, the Congress Hall, which didn't open till May the 31st, the Lustiga Huset, which didn't open till June the 2nd, and Lillekoping, which didn't open till June the 9th. At the time of opening, the park's list of attractions were as follows. The Children's Carousel, which was at the park from 1923 until 1924, Kalkbacken or Toboggan Run, which operated from 1923 to 1924, the Cable Car, which operated from 1923 till 1924, Gallop, which also only ran for 1 year from 1923 to 1924, Silhouette Cutter, which ran from 1923 till 1924, Air Swing, which only ran in the 1923 season, the Horse Carousel, which operated from 1923 till 1926, Hacksgungan, which ran from 1923 till 1925, and from 1932 until 1933, and then finally in 1949, the Crinoline Carousel, which ran from 1923 till 1925 and then for 1 year in 1934. The Bergbanan, which ran from 1923 until 1987. The Flying Carousel, which ran from 1923 till 1932. And the Funny House, which operated from 1923 until 1954 when the original building was demolished in 1930 and was replaced with a new version, and that one was demolished in 1957. The park also had 4 restaurants, a music pavilion, an exhibition theatre and the Congress Hall, as well as numerous games and side stalls. Herman Lindholm is the City Council's chairman and the initiator of the Anniversary Exhibitions Amusement Park, a Gothenburg-based fairground as he calls it. Lindholm is the chairman of the entertainment committee that runs the amusement park and is appointed within a few years to the managing director's role at Liseberg AB. In the park's first year, it received 4.1 million visitors. During the summer at the end of the 23 season, it was still unclear how the amusement park would be driven further in the future. The attractions are owned by the anniversary board, but at the beginning of August, renting to the private owners is discussed. Several tenders are received, especially regarding the various carousels. This is the start of a long tradition of privately owned attractions at Liseberg. Before the start of the 1924 season, it is time to give the amusement park a permanent name that would live on into its future. Although in 1923 the official name of the facility was the Jubilee Exhibition Amusement Park, it was often only called the amusement park by the people. In order to come up with a new name, a name competition was organised and published in the Gothenburg papers. Although the editorial staff explicitly reserved the name amusement park, many suggest this particular name. One argument is the name is already so ingrained in the brains of both Gothenburg and outsiders. Many people also propose Liseberg, because that is the area on which the amusement park is located and has been called so since the 18th century. In the end, the name Liseberg was never threatened, and according to the prize committee, no other proposal are comparable to the historically charged name. The first prize in the name competition went to a Miss Anna Grotting. Some of the other names suggested in the competition were Lustgarden, which came second prize in the competition, Cheersborg, Albano, Great Noise, Rubber Bullet, Babylon, El Dorado, Gailjan, and Paradise. So in 1924, the amusement park was renamed Liseberg, and a new entrance saw the light of day. From the beginning, the idea was to build up the old gate cabins that were the entrance when Liseberg was still a landing. The plan was never realised without the entrance coming to look like this until 1928. In 1924, the park operated with most of the rides it had from the previous year, but it only had 2 restaurants. In 1925, the operation of Liseberg was transferred to the newly formed company Liseberg AB, whose chairman was Herman Lindholm, a man who over the next 2 decades would shape the park from an exhibition into a fully fledged amusement park. Over the next 5 years, Liseberg would see the introduction of the following rides. Radio Cars was introduced in 1927 and has ran until the present day. The Car Carousel, which operated for 1 year from 1927 till 1928. The Whirlwind, that ran from 1929 till 1947 and then from 1949 till the present day. Also, in 1929, the park would get a new main entrance, which it would keep until it was changed once again in 1939. The park would also hold concerts at its concert theatre, which it's continued to do since 1924. In 1930, Liseberg is considerably smaller than it is today. The upper park is not used in the same way, and the park now needed to grow. A first action was taken a year earlier when the area around the great dance track inside the main entrance was expanded. Now eyes are turned towards the southern courtyard. The result is a completely new area with 4 new rides being installed. The old funny house was demolished and a new one was built. A new mini-golf course was built there in 1931 and stayed at the park in various forms, with the last course being removed in 1979. The Humorist Lounge was opened but would only last the 1931 season. The radio boats were installed that would operate from 1931 until 1954. The Mirror Hall, which was a mirror labyrinth that would operate from 1931 until 1961. And finally in this year was the Engine Dream. Unfortunately, very little is known about this ride. In 1932, Liseberg premiered its ghost train called the Ghost Haunt. This ride would stay at the park in various forms until 1957. In 1934, the park would continue to add new rides with the opening of the Looping Swings, which would operate from 1934 until 1945, and from 1949 until 1955, and the SS Hydron, a steamboat-like attraction which would only last 1 year. In 1936, the Liseberg Baths would open on the 13th of August. There's no doubt that the baths would fill a requirement for the people of Gothenburg. Just over 21,000 people take a dip before the bath closes on September the 27th. The baths would stay open until 1956, where they would be closed and would be used for storage and warehouses until they were finally demolished in 1962. 1936 also saw the opening of the Autodrome, a car race with gasoline-powered cars. The ride would close in 1939 because of fuel shortages due to World War II. In 1937, the haunted train would be overhauled for the first time and would become known as the Blue Train. And in 1938, the park would open the ride Rocket Line. The ride would last 3 years and was removed in 1941. In 1938, they would also open the ride The Small Cars, but this ride lasted an even shorter time and was closed in 1939. From 1939 to the spring of 1940, Liseberg's guests will be welcomed by a new main entrance with 2 towers. The 1940 season is mainly affected by two things: the blackout in May and the gasoline rationing. The darkening means that the traditional premiere of the Valborg Fair Eve will be postponed until May the 29th. The Ferris wheel premiered in 1940 and was the first at Liseberg, and would stay at the park until 1956. The Second World War affected Liseberg in many ways. For example, the radio boats are closed throughout 1940 because of the gasoline rationing. After some experimentation before the 1941 season, the boats are driven instead by carbide. On the 1st of July 1942, Liseberg's CEO Herman Lindholm retires. He is succeeded by Einar Ekström. Lindholm had devoted himself entirely to Liseberg. He was not only the initiator of Liseberg but also its first leader. Herman Lindholm personalised Liseberg's idea. For him, Liseberg was his youngster's dream. The classless amusement park with dance tracks, tents and sail, but also beautiful buildings, flowers, brilliant lights, theatre, concerts and varieties. Liseberg opened Mont Blanc in 1942, a ride that would operate until 1945. In 1943, the park would add Lilla Abbey, a trotting track in the upper park for children, but that would only run till 1945. In 1944, the major attraction news is the planetarium, which is inaugurated on May the 27th. The planetarium apparatus can show the starry sky at any time and in any place on Earth. Unfortunately, the planetarium would close in 1947 and the apparatus was sold and sent to America. In 1945, Liseberg takes the first historical step over the river Mollensalsen. The intention is to move the roller coaster there within the next 5 years. This never happens. In 1946, the park would open 4 new attractions. The first attraction was the ride Demon, which ran for 2 years. There was Press Pack, a sightseeing train that would run until 1951, when due to an accident it was taken away only to return in 1954 and was eventually sold in 1968. Rollebanen, which ran from 1946 until 1949, and finally Whimsical House, a fun house that ran for 2 years from 1946 until 1948. In early 1947, Liseberg's CEO Einar Ekström travels to Paris. When he returns, he has booked the French singing star Edith Piaf. Edith Piaf performed 6 appearances at Liseberg during the period of the 16th to the 17th and the 19th to the 22nd of June. Also in 1947, the ride Swinger Plane was opened. Swinger Plane turned out to be one of Liseberg's most persistent attractions and would run for 35 years, closing in 1982. In 1948, Demon would be replaced by the Caterpillar, but this ride would only last for 1 season. Also opening in this year was the ride Skymaston. It replaced Whirlwind and would operate until 1950. In 1949, the park would reopen Whirlwind, and this ride has ran at the park ever since. Also opening in this year are The Haunting, a temporary ghost train that replaced the Blue Train which had previously burnt down, Blue Boyjan and The Swings. All 3 of these rides would only last for 1 year. In 1950, Liseberg opens 3 new rides. The Big Ferris Wheel, which ran for a year from 1950 until 1951. The Little Ferris Wheel, which ran from 1950 until 1956. The Boat Carousel, which ran for 2 years from 1950 until 1952. And also in this year, the Blue Train would rise from the ashes and would run from 1950 until 1956. In 1951, the southern entrance is completely rebuilt, and the park says goodbye to the garden pavilion, which is demolished. New attractions this year are the flying carousel, which operated from 1951 until 1955, the looping carousel, which ran from 1951 until 1952, and the circuit, a car race ride that ran for 22 years from 1951 until 1972. To improve safety, the roller coaster undergoes a complete renovation. The roller coaster is now Europe's longest at 926 metres. It's fast, durable, but above all, safer than before. New rides in this season are the helicopter, which operated from 1952 until 1955, and the car carousel, which ran from 1952 until 1957. In 1954, the southern yard is to be rebuilt. In the autumn, virtually everything is demolished in that part of the park. The Lustig Hundset, radio boats, the mirror hall, and the game floor are levelled to the ground. Some of the buildings which in several cases had existed at Liseberg since 1931 are gone. The new ride at the park this year is called The Beast, and it would run from 1954 until 1955. On Christmas Eve, Liseberg's former CEO Herman Lindholm, 80 years old, dies. Lindholm was the chairman of the city council and Gothenburg's leading municipal councillor before he left these items in order to devote himself entirely to Liseberg. He was not only the initiator of Liseberg, but also its first leader. In 1955, the new rides to arrive at the park were the Octopus, which was rented for the 1955 season. The boat track, or Tunnel of Love as it was also known, would run from 1955 until 1972. Paris, a brand new funhouse that would run from 1955 until 1956. Cyclotron, which ran from 1955 until 1956. The short time of this ride was most likely due to the Gothenburg paper's review of it, which said, if you want to be smeared on a wall as a fly, then these possibilities are now available at Liseberg. And finally, the watercourse, which was a makeshift attraction to fill the new southern area and was at the park for just one season. 1956 sees the Liseberg baths close and 6 new rides open. The rides were the Children's Rally, which ran from 1956 until 1978, the Fly Carousel, which would run from 1956 until 1962, Fun on Wheels, which ran from 1956 until 1990, the Magic City, a mirror and glass labyrinth that ran from 1956 until 1961, and in 1956 the Blue Train was rebuilt and changed its name to the Ghost Train and would last for 1 year from 1956 until 1957. Compared with the upheaval of the previous 2 years, 1957 turned out to be a relatively calm year for the park, with only 3 new rides opening. These rides were the Hax Kittel, which ran from 1957 until 1958, Pony Rides, which ran from 1957 until 1958, and Roundup, which would run from 1957 until 1960. 1958 saw turnstiles introduced at the main entrance for the first time. And finally in this year, the bridge over the river Moldassan to Baldur's Hague is completed. The only ride to open this year is the Ghost Palace, which would run from 1958 until 1965. In 1959, no new rides are presented at the park. The reason behind this is the new power station that is being built into the mountain behind the head office. This is necessary as the power requirements for the park had become so great that without the aid of a new power station, the old grid can barely tolerate the additional of a coffee maker, let alone any new rides. Liseberg begins the 60s by debuting two new attractions. The Children's Paradise opens, but it's only there for one season. And the Jungle Express, which ran for 7 years from 1960 until 1967. In 1961, the radio cars and the Children's Rally are expanded and improved. They get new wagons amongst other things, and more new rides are added to the park. Happy Tinol is a fun house that ran from 1961 until 1968, and the Paratrooper, which would stay at the park from 1961 until 1972. The summer of 1962 would go down in history as the worst weather ever for Liseberg. The temperatures in July are the lowest in 40 years, and as a whole the summer is the coldest since 1928. The rainfall is also greater than normal. All of this contributes to the guest numbers staying at just over 1.6 million compared to 1.7 million in 1961. The only attraction to open in 1962 is the Crystal Salon, and has been at Liseberg from 1962 till present day. In 1963, Liseberg's 40th anniversary is celebrated with a special celebration and anniversary week on the 31st of August till the 6th of September. On November the 11th, 1963, Einar Ekstrom resigns as managing director at Liseberg, 1 year before his pension starts. His replacement is Olaf Calderon, who had been vice president of Liseberg for 17 years. On November the 24th of this year, there's a fire in the main entrance. The fire occurs in one of the towers due to a fault in a light tube mount. Fortunately, the fire is soon under control and the damage was limited, and the tower, after repaired, sees the entrance return to its former state. The new rides installed this year at the park are the Anniversary Carousel. This ride was a carousel that was rented especially for the celebration of Liseberg's 40th anniversary. The lease agreement for this ride was transferred to a purchase, and so the carousel continued on at Liseberg until the autumn of 1977, and in 1979 the ride was renovated and changed its name to the Pony Carousel, and then ran until 2015. The other ride to arrive at the park was Meteor, which would run from 1963 right up to 1975. In 1964, between June the 8th and June the 16th, the German-American singer and actress Marlene Dietrich plays the Cabaret Hall. It's her first appearance ever in Gothenburg. In the same year, Paul Anka also plays at the concert hall, as does Cliff Richard and the Shadows. In 1964, the Park Express would make a return after a 13-year absence, and would run until 1968 when it was sold to Eskilstuna. 1965 would be the last season for the Cabaret Hall. The Cabaret Hall had hosted stars like Edith Piaf, Marlene Dietrich, but over time the audience's interest had cooled. In the autumn, the classic building is demolished to make room for the 1966 great attraction news, the roller coaster Super 8. More notable acts that would perform at the park this year are Cliff Richards, Louis Armstrong, the Animals, the Kinks, and the Osmonds. New rides that would open this year are the Flying Elephants, which would run from 1965 until 1986, and Tolly Tender, which would run for just 1 year from 1965 until 1966. In 1966, Liseberg would get its very first steel roller coaster, called Super 8. It is built on the land where the old Cabaret Hall stood, and becomes an immediate success. Just under 460,000 visitors choose to take a ride during the summer. The ride would operate from 1966 until 1979, when it was dismantled and sold to Holland. Also returning this year is the new Blue Train, which would run from 1966 until 1979. The list of artists appearing at the park would continue to increase. This year, some of the notable names who played at the park are the Beach Boys, Dusty Springfield, the Osmonds, the Kinks, and the Who. Simon and Garfunkel were booked to play at Liseberg on Sunday the 3rd of July. The duo, consisting of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, broke through a few years earlier with The Sound of Silence and come to Gothenburg as one of America's hottest acts. Unfortunately, the concert will never happen, as Paul Simon gets a problem with his throat and is forced to throw in the towel. Therefore, Simon and Garfunkel end on the list of world stars that almost appeared at Liseberg. Prior to the 1967 season, Liseberg made a major change to their pricing policy. The Liseberg booklet was introduced. In this practice, it means turning around half price of the rides. In this year, the park also added the Ferris wheel to its list of attractions. The Ferris wheel would operate from 1967 until 2015. Once again, there is a long list of notable artists who performed at the park this year, with such names as Cat Stevens, Frank Zappa, Sammy Davis Jr., Sandy Shaw, the Osmonds, the Hollies, and finally, the one and only Jimi Hendrix. In 1968, Liseberg premieres two brand new rides. The first ride is Peter Pan. The inspiration for Peter Pan was taken from Disneyland's It's a Small World ride. At Liseberg, Peter Pan was presented as this year's most fun news in 1969, but it was also the most expensive. The attraction was reportedly Europe's most lavish at the time, and the ride would end up operating from 1968 until 1980. The second ride to open at the park was the Octopus. The Octopus was a Schwarzkopf spinning carousel that premiered in 1968. It had rotating gondolas that were stuck in height adjustable arms, the same principle as in Jukebox, which premiered 25 years later. The ride would operate from 1968 until 1978. The live performances would continue at Liseberg this year, with the big acts performing this year being Fleetwood Mac, Led Zeppelin, The Animals and The Kinks. After the 1968 season, although not a new ride, the Whirlwind was beginning to look tired, so Liseberg looked for somebody to upgrade it, and the people they went to were legendary attraction manufacturer Anton Schwarzkopf. The result of this was the new Whirlwind, which was presented on May the 15th, 1969. Then, and for 9 years to come, it was placed in front of Super 8 in the middle of the park. The live acts to perform this year at Liseberg were B.B. King, Blind Faith featuring Eric Clapton, Cliff Richard, The Hollies, and a certain Bjorn Ulvaeus and Agneta Fältskog, who would later form half of ABBA. "1970 is a quiet year at the park, with the focus being mainly on upgrading current rides. The old bumper car track is worn out and is replaced with a brand new course and is equipped with 30 brand new cars. The facade and interior, and to some extent the rides, of the Blue Train and the Tunnel of Love are extensively renovated. Some of the notable performances at the park this year are Duke Ellington, Jimi Hendrix, Joan Baez, and the Rolling Stones. In 1971, Liseberg opens Swing Around. Swing Around was fitted with 14 gondolas on the end of arms that at high speed would catapult out horizontally. In this year there would be a decrease in foreign artists performing at Liseberg due to the tax increase. The main act to perform at Liseberg this year would be Elton John. Immediately after the end of the season, work begins on renewing Liseberg before the anniversary season of 1973. Among planned projects for the park are the construction of a new water attraction called the Flume Ride. The construction also includes a small boat path with electronic boats. The Ferris wheel this year is also moved to the attraction area in the upper park, and the racetrack is demolished and the boat track under the roller coaster is closed. In 1973, Liseberg turns 50 and it celebrates with a special anniversary days. Although the year's celebrations are also dampened when in the evening of October the 9th a fire starts in the concert hall. At the same time as the fire starting, members of the Gothenburg Car Sports Federation are preparing an ongoing car exhibition in the premises. With the concert hall in ash, an era ends. The hall was at the park already when Liseberg's amusement park opened in 1923, and for the period of 50 years a lot of big stars had appeared in the room. 1973 also sees Olaf Calderon step down as park CEO, and he is replaced by Bo Kinnetorf, who was previously the programs manager at Liseberg. New attractions for the park's Jubilee year are the Children's Boat, which ran from 1973 until 2012, the Flume Ride, which is one of Liseberg's history's most classical rides and has ran from 1973 until the present day. and Turbo Star, which would run from 1973 until 1980. Also this year, Benny Andersson, Bjorn Ulvaeus, Agneta Fältskog and Anna-Frid Lyngstad would play at Liseberg this year, although they were yet to be known as ABBA. In 1974, the Children's Rally was reopened. The ride had been so badly damaged by the concert hall fire that the old version had to be demolished and rebuilt. Other new attractions in 1974 are an indoor playhouse that was opened from 1974 until 1976, and a mini golf course which was open from 1974 till 1979. Only one attraction would be added the following year, and that was Astronaut. Astronaut was a one-man attraction which would premiere in 1975. The astronaut looked like a broken egg in which one had to climb in and kick himself on his own. It was quiet and it was cheap, because each one chose their own speed and few people would feel bad. The attraction survived only one season at Liseberg, and in 1976 it was converted into a fish pond. By far the biggest thing to happen at Liseberg in 1975 was ABBA performing. It was the second time that the group had performed at Liseberg, but it was the first time they had performed under the name ABBA. Since their last performance, they had won the Eurovision Song Contest and had released 3 albums. In 1976, due to the raising of the entrance fee for adults, the entrance system was changed. The system of so-called turnstiles with coin throws, which was successfully introduced in the late 1950s, is scrapped in favour of payments via manual services. In connection with this, 4 new entrance kiosks are placed inside the main entrance. In this year, Liseberg would also install Enterprise. Enterprise would run for 7 seasons from 1976 until 1982. The place of honour is new for 1977. At first, the first 50 handprints are going to be placed by known people, and the site of honour is located in the children's area. One of the first people to cast his handprints is Muhammad Ali. At the beginning of the year, Liseberg's former CEO, Einar Ekström, dies aged 77. Ekström succeeded Herman Lindholm as managing director at Liseberg in 1942, and he remained in the role for 21 years until 1963. At the park, the only new ride that would open this year is Ladybug, a children's coaster that would run from 1977 until 1985. Guest figures would pass 2 million for the first time ever in this year. Before the 1978 season, 2 new Liseberg booklets are introduced. The Little Booklet and the Little Children's Booklet are released. In total, there are now 6 different booklets with the name Small and Large Booklet in the categories Adult, Teens and Children. At the same time, the entrance ticket is dropped into the booklets, which means that they can only be bought inside the park, a change that not everybody is happy with. This year at Liseberg, they opened the rides Mini Cars, a children's attraction that ran from 1978 until 1982, and Spaceship Alpha, which would run for 2 seasons from 1978 until 1979. In 1979, the rides Super 8 and Spaceship Alpha are sold. Also in 1979, the park get permission to build Lisebergshallen, a combined sports and concert venue that lay inside Liseberg's main entrance between the years of 1980 and 2018. It would be built on the site of Pop-In, which was demolished to make way. Also, new attractions at the park this year are Cinema 180 Degrees, which would operate from 1979 till 1987, Farfar's Bill, or Grandfather's Car, which has ran from 1979 to the present day, and the Pony Carousel, which would run from 1979 to the year 2009 and from 2010 until 2015. So that completes part 1 of our history of Liseberg. Click the link at the end of the video to go over to part 2. Please like and subscribe to our videos and follow us on social media at our Instagram, Facebook and Twitter account.